Hey everyone, how you doing? Today I want to talk about a very famous, very influential post-apocalyptic science fiction horror novel, and that is I Am Legend by Richard Matheson. Now, there have been 3 movie adaptations based on this book, starting in 1964 with The Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price. That was an Italian-US co-production. Then in 1971, Hollywood took a stab at the material with The Omega Man, starring Charlton Heston. And then most recently, in 2007, Will Smith played the main character, Robert Neville, in I Am Legend, to also mixed results. None of these films, adaptations, as fun as they might be, can match the sheer power of this original short novel. This was the 3rd novel that Richard Matheson wrote, and it was highly influential, as I mentioned before. You know, it probably had a huge impact on, in general, post-apocalyptic fiction, certainly on various films and zombie movies, particularly George A. Romero's original Night of the Living Dead, featuring as it does a man, the seemingly last surviving man, holed up in his house fending off a attack of the undead. Not in this case zombies. I'm going to get to the movie adaptations later, but let me first talk about the story. Now, this is a very kind of grim yet engrossing, dark, at times disturbing novel. It's short. This edition, the Bantam edition from 1964, I've had this sitting on my shelf for a long time and only now got around to it. I wanted to read another short novel, one that is a hugely important one that I hadn't gotten around to reading yet for this Horror Mayhem 2026. And I decided it's time to crack this one open and get through it. Can't believe I've never read this before. It's really good. It's a really powerful book. Richard Matheson has very taut prose. I mean, some people might say there's some slight dated elements because this is a book that's, you know, published in 1954 originally. So we're looking at, what's that, about, 72 years ago. So there are perhaps some elements that are dated, but I think it stands up very well to reading a modern interpretation. And it's very effective. Basically, the book centers around Robert Neville. He's kind of an everyman. In the movies, they tend to make him a doctor or a kind of scientist. He's not in the book at all. He's just a regular guy. So the book throws us in kind of in media res, right in the middle of the action, as we follow the day-to-day life, kind of drudgery of Robert Neville's life about a year after this massive plague has turned all humans into kind of these mutated vampire people lusting after his blood. This is set in 1976, so it would have been, 20 plus years after he wrote the book, and kind of a speculative near future sort of book. And apparently we learn in flashbacks that there was some kind of maybe a nuclear war that developed into some severe dust storms, and then a plague starts to creep across the world. This book is set in Gardena, California, and kind of the suburbs there. And Neville, we learn, had a wife named Virginia and a baby daughter named Kathy, and that, kind of bits and pieces of his very PTSD sort of reminiscence, where he's trying to shut out the horror and the emotional carnage that happened after his wife and child succumbed to this disease that killed almost everyone else, or seemingly killed. So the vampire people don't come out during the day, of course, like the typical vampire lore. They hide out in various homes and kind of lapse into kind of a coma state. And during the day, he goes out and hunts them down and kills them. He doesn't have to drive a stake into their heart. He learns that he can just puncture them anywhere and they die. And he's, eventually in the book, he starts to wonder, why does this work and what's happening and what's causing this? But at first, he's just kind of going through the motions of his daily life, goes to some stores and gets supplies that he needs. He apparently had kitted out his house with a big, deep freeze, and he has a lot of frozen foods and meats, and he's got a lot of canned goods. He's got some weapons. He's got tools. He built a hothouse to grow garlic, to string it around the house, and by day he goes out and repairs things around the house, because at night a lot of these creatures come out and taunt him. They're saying, "Come out, Neville, come out." Especially his former friend and co-worker and neighbor, Ben Cortman, comes out and taunts him every night right when the sun goes down. But in the next day, he finds several of the vampire bodies dead. Maybe they succumbed and their blood was sucked out by the others. These creatures seem to be fairly mindless and fairly, they're not figuring out exactly how to, get in and get to him. He's boarded up all his windows. He's painted a mural in his house so that, to kind of look at, and plays classical music records and reads books and cooks steaks. But he's living a pretty morose, lonely existence. And then he has a close encounter and kind of a very exciting scene where he's, kind of lapses. He drinks too much, he smokes too much, and he has kind of a thinking back about his dead wife and his child, and all the horror and the sadness that gripped him then kind of gets him into a kind of drunken stupor. He realizes that he's left it too long, where he's went out to the crypt to visit his wife, where he's ended up burying her, and it's getting late, and is he going to get home in time? And by the time he drives back to his house, the vampires are out, and he has to fight his way back in.
The sun's already set. They'll be everywhere.
And after that, he starts to get more of a purpose in his life. He needs something to look forward to, and he starts to investigate what might be causing this vampiric plague and the various stages that these no longer completely human creatures go through. It's a very intense book. Matheson does a really good job getting into Neville's head and how he's trying not to go crazy, how he's struggling with his, the vampire women still look pretty much like humans. They're not weird mutated creatures in appearance so much. They have kind of glazed eye expression, and but they're, obviously trying to parade their figures and sexuality, the women, the vampires, outside at night, and he's trying to lure him out so they can attack him and drink his blood, and he's going through sex withdrawals for sure. Matheson does talk about that. He does talk about all the other thoughts that go through Neville's head, both disturbing and natural things, and it's very effective. And how he finally, Neville builds a kind of shell, a hard shell around himself. He's going out and killing these creatures. He's doing it during the day when they're sleeping, so they're not, suffering quite the same way. But he does end up, there's one scene where he has apparently dispatched 47 of these in one day, usually around the neighborhood, around his house. He's always looking for his former neighbor and friend, Ben Cortman, the one that taunts him the most at night, the one who seems to have his wits still about him to a certain extent. He tests out various theories, about running water, that vampires supposedly can't, can't cross running water, and will other similar vegetables like onions or leeks work, like garlic, etc. So there's a section where he's doing that. There's another section that's just heartbreaking, where he sees a living dog, and he spends so much time trying to tame the dog and get it to trust him. And he's so hungry for companionship. And then later in the book, he's sleek and glossy and big and strong, and he's well fed, and he's got himself in a pure vampire killing, live every day as it comes sort of state. And then he sees a woman walking in the sunlight. Now, the vampires never walk in the sunlight. Is this a regular woman? What's going on? What is her situation? Has he maybe found a new companion? It's very interesting where it goes from there. The book is short, sharp, fast, sometimes brutal, very interesting, and Neville is a complex and interesting character. So I highly enjoy it, and I highly recommend you read it if you're liking that kind of thing. Now, it's possible that in this day and age, after The Walking Dead and the Romero zombie movies and 28 Days Later, and all these kind of post-apocalyptic movies that have come out, that the book won't seem as fresh now as it did when it first came out, but it must have been something when it first came out and had quite an impact. It obviously impacted George A. Romero, and he basically has admitted ripping it off essentially for his Night of the Living Dead movie. And it's a real powerful piece of work, and it's a short, sharp read. I highly recommend it. Before I get to the movie adaptations, I want to talk a little bit about Richard Matheson. Now, some people, probably quite a few fans of horror and even science fiction and fantasy, will be aware of Richard Matheson's name. He's written a lot of novels and stories, and he also wrote many scripts for television and film. He has several works based off of his short stories or novels, some of which include A Stir of Echoes, The Incredible Shrinking Man, Somewhere in Time, which was based off of his novel Bid Time Return. What else? He had What Dreams May Come, and The Legend of Hell House was his novel turned into the movie Hell House, which is a really creepy ghost story movie. Highly recommend that one. That came out in the 70s. Steel, which was made as Real Steel, about the robot fighters, and also Button. Now, his scripts for Twilight Zone, he wrote so many good ones, including The Invaders and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, etc. And he also wrote the first two Night Stalker adaptations, the Night Stalker TV movies, The Night Stalker and The Night Strangler. He adapted his short story Duel into the teleplay that Steven Spielberg directed early in his career. Very excellent and intense suspense film. He also wrote screenplays for several of Roger Corman's Poe cycle of films for American International Pictures back in the 60s, including The House of Usher, The Pit and the Pendulum, Tales of Terror, and The Raven. Just a lot of TV movie work. He wrote for various westerns and cop shows, as well as Twilight Zone and other anthology series. Just a terrific writer. His story is very vivid and visual, which of course makes sense considering he was also a screenwriter. Now, he did happen to co-write, or at least at the beginning stage, co-write the first film adaptation of I Am Legend called The Last Man on Earth. That was a U.S.-Italian co-production that came out in 1964. And that film starred Vincent Price as Dr. Robert Morgan, not Neville. For some reason, they changed the name from Neville to Morgan, and made, I guess as a case to make it more simple, made Neville not just an everyman, but a doctor, a scientist. Now, this one is, because maybe Matheson was involved in co-writing, at least at the beginning. Apparently he was dissatisfied with how things were going with the script and asked to have his name changed to an alias. He's credited under the name Logan Swanson. Several other writers completed the script after he left, but maybe because he was involved at the beginning, this movie follows the plot, the story beats of the novel I Am Legend quite closely in a lot of ways. So there's lots of cool aspects to it. It was filmed in Italy. It's got a creepy black and white cinematography, and it's got really good atmosphere. The problem is, unfortunately, the casting of Vincent Price. Now, I love Vincent Price. He's really good at playing, intellectual, artistic bon vivant types like he was in real life. He's also good at playing real mean SOB villains, or kind of genteel or kind of aristocratic fellows who are on the verge of madness or do indeed go mad. He's really good at all of those, but what he isn't good at, really, and can't really convey realistically, is the sort of everyman, muscular, macho, action man sort of character that is the centerpiece of the novel and the other two movie adaptations that came later. So, the scenes of him fighting off vampires and pounding stakes in and things just don't quite work. It just doesn't. it creates kind of a cognitive dissonance, and unfortunately the persona of Vincent Price kind of takes away from the central role, which is really crucial because he is the last man on earth, so more or less. So you need to believe him that he's this kind of capable action man, everyman sort of character. Vincent Price is many things. He was not an everyman like that. He was more of a Renaissance man. So the film is interesting but flawed because of that. Then in 1971, Hollywood took a stab at it again. Now this is my favorite of the three movie adaptations by far. It's more of an action suspense thriller with science fiction elements. It definitely leans more into the science fiction side, I think, and does away with any sort of vampiric lore. This one stars Charlton Heston, who is perfectly cast as Robert Neville. They return the family name to Neville, and he's big and brawny and capable, and he goes around by day machine gunning and hunting out these mutants who are just mutants now. They're basically just dying from this disease. He is immune. In this movie, he was an army virologist, and he is working on a cure for this plague when the helicopter he's traveling in crashes, and he survives the crash, and he injects himself with this serum that he's developed, and that's the last of the serum he had, and he becomes immune. Now in the book and the first movie, Neville theorizes that the reason he's immune is that he was bit by a vampire bat when he was stationed in Panama. He was also a soldier in the past, which adds to his credibility to his butt-kicking sort of character in the novel, as well as in later movies. What it does get right very well, I think, is a sense of an isolated, dead, during the day anyway, Los Angeles, and then the mutants that are hanging on. They've been united for a common cause under this cult leader named Matthias, played to excellent effect by Anthony Zerba. And at night they come to the big brownstone apartment block that Neville has taken over to make his kind of castle filled with the relics of the past, the dead past of great works of art and sculpture and food and all this stuff. And by day, he hunts these mutants who are out to get him. But in this one, there are actually pockets of other human survivors who have not been infected by the plague, and Robert Neville's loneliness and desire for human companionship lead him to pursue and find these people, and also eventually lead to his downfall. And this is a really fun, fast-paced movie. Like, sure, there's some dated elements, some blaxploitation elements, courtesy of co-star Rosalind Cash, that perhaps haven't aged very well. But overall, the movie really moves and suspenseful, fun, and it has a fantastic soundtrack, courtesy of composer Ron Grainer. And it's a really fun movie, but it is the least, I guess, true to the book. And perhaps that's why it's the most fun, in a way, because it, despite it also being pretty dark and bleak in a lot of ways, like a lot of 70s science fiction movies were, it still retains a real sense of fun. That version of the story, The Omega Man, was directed by Boris Sagal, and it has a script by John William and Joyce Hooper Corrington, a husband and wife screenwriter duo. They make some interesting choices, but overall it's a pretty effective script, I think, in a lot of ways. And then in 2007, Hollywood tried once again, this time with Will Smith in the Robert Neville role. Again, he's a military virologist. This time they do give him a dog for at least a portion of the movie. And as in all of the movies, the first 45 minutes or so, the first half, where it's showing Neville's day-to-day life and how he survives and how the world that he's in, and his kind of state of mind, is pretty effective. And I think all three movies do a good job at that. It's more in the second half of the film where the story breaks down a little bit in all three, when he starts to come in contact with other humans. Now, the Will Smith film is also pretty good. It has some good elements and some really creepy and effective scenes. Its main flaw is that it made the mistake, the producers, the filmmakers made the mistake of rendering the mutants. They are vampires again, however, they're rendered almost in kind of demonic, monstrous form, which is cool, but they are CGI effects. They're special effect creatures, and so they don't move in a realistic way. They moved far too quickly and don't have the heft of a real kind of human in a mask or in prosthetics. So I think they should have went the route where they had real people, real actors or stunt people playing these monsters with some kind of makeup effects. It would have been far more effective. And for me, that CGI element really kind of tanks the movie's effectiveness with the monsters. Still worth watching all of these, and still interesting in that, because that core idea that Richard Matheson brought so vividly to life in the book is so strong. And of course, that kind of premise has carried over into a lot of post-apocalyptic and zombie apocalypse fiction. So overall, this book is the way to go. So if you haven't read the novel, it's short, it's punchy, it's dark, it's grim, it's gritty. I recommend it a lot. It's well done. And as it says on the back here, this is my Bantam edition from 1964. I am the last man on earth. I am not insane. I don't know how much longer I can last out. This cover is weird, though, in a way. It's kind of striking in the use of the different colored font, right? This may be the most terrifying science fiction novel you will ever read. But look at that picture on the front and on the back. It's kind of weird. It looks like instead of a regular human, Robert Neville is Leatherface attacking these vampires. He's got this weird depiction of a face there. I don't know what the heck's going on there. Who would I recommend this to? Well, I'd recommend this to, of course, science fiction fans. I'd highly recommend this to horror fans, and especially fans of science fiction horror. And if you're a fan of post-apocalyptic works, then this is also a novel for you. So this is a seminal one in the field. So I highly recommend this book. It's really good and really intense, and I think you will find it pretty interesting. So that does it for me for today. Thank you very much for watching. I will see you in a future video real soon. Take care and happy reading.